You know, whenever you go through a really bad breakup, there's always some butthole standing there going, "Are you going to get back on the horse? There's plenty more fish in the sea." Listen, when you get thrown off a horse, 9 times out of 10, you're going to land in a great big pile of wet, fresh horse flop. And once you're there, covered in that, you don't feel like going fishing. The day I got my ring returned to me, I, I went into at first I don't know. I'm not even sure how I felt. I was a little bit in shock. I was a little bit in denial. But I remember I took the ring and put it back I wrapped it in the note and put it in my pocket, and I drove immediately down to Jerry's. And knowing she wasn't going to be there, because wherever she was in town. So I drove down to Jerry's, and I walked in the door, and he was sitting at the kitchen table. And I said, "Well, Jug," and before I even got it out of my mouth, he looked at me, and he could tell. He went, "Oh God." He said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, she's done lit out on me. She's gone. She left me. Got my ring back." And Jerry kind of did his, like, sort of his fake, disaster voice, "Oh God. Oh no." Like he was half kidding, But then I looked at him. I said, "I know this isn't." I said, "This is really bad, Jerry." I said, "She's gone. We're not in a fight. We're not having a tiff, a lover's spat." And I pulled out the paper and the ring. I said, "It's over. She's done lit out with another man, and that's where we're at." And Jerry's face kind of fell. He kind of looked at me, and he went, "Oh no, oh no," he said. You really think?" I said, "Yeah, well, what do you think?" I said. I was half pissed off at him because he wasn't getting it, And Zelma walked out of the bedroom and goes, "What's going on?" And I said, "Well, Stephanie's left me. She didn't even have. I think I said something along the lines that she didn't even have the decency to come tell me to my face. She left my ring on the dash of my car." And Zelma was angry. She said, "She did what?" And I said, "Yep." I said, "There it is." And I think I threw the ring on the table. I was like, "There it is." I think I left it there, if I'm not mistaken. I might have. Zelma was really pissed. She was like, "I can't believe this. I raised her better than that," and blah, blah, blah. And she was upset. So something that stands out to me now is one of the last things that Jerry said to me, like after the initial shock had worn off in the middle of this conversation, Jerry looked at me and went, "Well, you're not going to leave me, are you? You're not leaving, are you?" And I thought to myself, "You fat son of a bitch. That's all that you care about is, I just spent a whole year, clearing off your land that I'm not going to get to use now, of course, and doing all of this stuff and taking care of her and trying to protect her from you. And you're asking me, now that she's left me, at my lowest point, your only concern is that I'm not leaving the fucking band." And all of this ran through my head. And I wasn't in a good place for a few seconds. So I told Jerry, I said, "No, I'm not leaving you. I'm not going to let this take me out." I said, whatever she's going to do, she's going to do. And I really thought in my own head, that showing the kind of fortitude that it was going to take, because I was really in love with that girl. I treated her like a queen. And I thought, I'm going to show some serious balls here to all these people. Jerry, Tammy, Zelma, Emmett, the whole load of these people, right? This is gonna get me some brownie points and maybe some money for a change, right? If I show this kind of loyalty under this kind of duress, surely to God, Jerry's gonna give me something for this, So I like I said in the last episode, I just put my head down and went to work. And I didn't hang around Jerry's as much as I had, of course, as I really didn't want to run into her in everyday situations. Working in the band was inevitable, unavoidable that I was going to be trapped in the bus with her and trapped on stage and trapped everywhere with her while she was doing whatever she was doing. So I was still working with Joey. We had the shop open up in Demopolis. It was about an hour's drive away, and I was running that store. And that was all going good. It was the only money I was really making. That branch of the Sullivan family kept me alive for nearly 5 years. They took care of me, and I owe them. I don't even know what I owe them. Joey and Linda and David, like, these people were real people. They were and they knew. Joey knew. Joey used to know things that nobody knew, and he'd sort of tell you along the way, you better watch this one or that one or whatever, because this is what they're going to do, and blah, blah, blah. And I wouldn't say anything, and I'd be just watching along. And a few months later, it's exactly what happened. And I think Joey knew all along that Stephanie and I weren't going to work out. And he was actually the one who even suggested to me that, I think she was just hooking you to make sure you could stay in that band. And I don't know if that's true. I'm not going to accuse anybody of that, but it certainly seemed like it was very convenient that, she stayed with me long enough to where I couldn't back out of, there was a family relationship between me and Jerry by that point. We were battle brothers. We'd been through the worst of the worst, and well, not the best of the best yet. That was coming up right away. But it was true. Like, at that point when she walked away, I could not walk away from Jerry. I would have felt really bad about it. I would have felt like had gone back on my word, and I don't like doing that. I never have. When I make a promise to somebody, I try everything I can to follow through, most of the time at my own detriment. And so there was a really nice girl up in Demopolis who knew the people that we rented our store space from. Her name was Kelly, and she was can't remember. I think she might have worked for a cell phone company at the time or something like that. I can't remember. It was an interesting job she had. It was a tech job of some kind. And she's come around the shop, and she was a real pretty girl. And she was my age, or older than me, I think, a bit. And she was either divorced or widowed. I can't remember. She had a son, and she was funny and just nice. We all loved her. She was just a nice person, right? And so I thought to myself, okay, whatever. What's good for the goose, good for the gander. So I was no time at all calling her up and saying, hey, let's go see a movie. And she said yes immediately. And next thing you know, we were hanging out all the time. She had a nice house up there in the country on a little pond, and I'd go over there, and her mother lived with her. Her mother was a great lady, and her son, and they were all into music. And they had a pair of Weimaraner dogs, which I just loved. Those dogs were so awesome. And I just said, screw this. I'm not going to let I can't let this, put me in the ditch. I'm just going to go hang out with her. She's completely normal. I don't have to deal, and they weren't into all this religious bullshit and all. They were just normal country folk. She had a good job. Her mother was a nice person. It was just, I just went there. I said, screw it. I'm just going there. And so I sort of disappeared out of the scene, really, for the most part. I was all still showing up for the gigs and work and Joey and going home every once in a while. Bob was hanging out with Jerry a lot and Emmett. But for the most part, I just went and spent time with her. And so... And there was she had, maybe she worked there, I don't know, but there was one point in time as our relationship went on. I told her, I said, I wish I could get a small loan from somebody so I can consolidate, because I was making no money still. And so she said, well, come and see my friend. And so she took me to basically a finance company, I think it was. And I borrowed $1,500 from a finance company with her co-signing, because I wasn't legal yet. And I borrowed $1,500 and got my shit together. And so I was that helped. So everything was going along tickety-boo, and I started bringing her to the gigs. I'm sorry. It was probably a bastard thing to do, but you know what? It wasn't. I brought Kelly to a few of the gigs, and later on I was told, and I don't believe it, but later on Tammy told me, when I started showing up with her, it crushed Stephanie, and I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, what? How does that even work?" And Tammy was like, "Well, Stephanie thought would try to come back," and I was like, why would I do that? Right? Like, why? That's the thing about me. I'm not good at playing games. I never have been. I don't like them, and I like people that are straightforward and say whatever the truth is, no matter how bad it is. That's my deal. That's always been my deal. And incidentally, one of the reasons a lot of people don't like me, because I pull no punches. I say what I observe, and if it's wrong, it's wrong, but at least it's my truth. I'm not being, I'm not being anything. I'm just saying, this is what I see. This is black and white and gray and blah, and there you go. And if you don't like that, then don't fucking ask me anymore. So, but I was told that, later on, I was told, well, she didn't know. I was like, well, she was off with another guy. And so anyhow, that was going on, and that was all good. Kelly was a wonderful person. The next thing that happened was probably one of the most traumatic things that happened. I think actually the most traumatic thing that happened during my entire stay there. We were at a gig one night, I don't know, 200 or 300 miles away from home. And I don't even know how the hell this happened, because we didn't have cell phones in those days. But someone called the church where we were playing, I'm not sure who, and let us know that Emmett Sullivan had died suddenly. And he was sitting at the kitchen table with his neighbor Gary and telling jokes and laughing, and he asked Gary for a light. He put a cigarette in his mouth and he asked Gary for a light. And before Gary could pass the lighter across the table, Emmett had just fallen out of the chair dead. And Gary jumped up and tried to revive him, but he was gone. He was gone. He had been going for quite some time. He had congestive heart failure. Enoch was still basically trying to drag him out on the road every chance he could get, even though Emmett was too sick to go. But Emmett needed the money because he couldn't mechanic anymore, as he had no strength and no wind. And the first thing I thought of was the very last time I went anywhere with Emmett. I was asked, amazingly, to go. Enoch and Margie got short-handed for something, and Enoch called me and said, do you think you could come play this church down in Mobile with us? Because they can't find a mandolin player, and Emmett needs a drive, and all of this. And I said, well, yeah, sure, I can go down there. Jerry wasn't going to care. Jerry didn't have the same, angst about Enoch as Enoch had about Jerry. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll go get Emmett and I'll meet you down there. So I remember taking Emmett down. I remember going to his house, and he had to wear he couldn't get it. His feet were so swollen up, he could just barely get them in these black sneakers that he had to take all the laces out just to get his feet in his shoes. And he was putting his shoes on, and he looked at me and he started to cry. And he said, man, I just can't go anymore. He said, I hate to let Jody down, He said, I hate to let Enoch down, but I just can't do it anymore. And tears were going down his face, and I was like, don't worry, Em. It's okay, And Emmett said, I said, I'm really glad you came to get me, because I can't ride in them other cars, He liked my Oldsmobile because it had a great big front, bench seat. It was comfortable, and he could get in and out of the car easier. And he said, I'm glad you came and got me. And so I took him down to the gig in Mobile, and we played, and he played, and He didn't play well, but he played enough to still show his genius. And, I helped him back out to the car after the gig and drove him home and helped him back in the house. And that was the last time I think I really saw him, possibly. After that, it wasn't long after that. And Emmett looked at me that night. I got him home, and he got comfortable again and rested, got his breath back, and was sitting at the table drinking a cup of coffee. And he looked at me and he said, "Son, you can carry the mail." He said, "You can sure enough carry the mail." And what he meant by that was I had become the musician that he wanted me to become. He'd rode me for 10 years, picked on me, and showed me things and just gave me a hard time, with a smile on his face, And he said, "Son, you sure enough can carry the mail. You can carry the mail, boy." And I said, "Thanks, Emmett." And that was the last time I saw him. So there we were, just a few months later, I think, sitting in the bus, and the pastor came into the bus. And he went up to Jerry and got right in his ear and said something, and Jerry just collapsed. And I knew something was wrong. At first, I thought it was Zelma. The way Jerry reacted, I thought his wife something happened to Zelma. It wasn't Zelma. It was Emmett. And we had dates left, and Jerry said, "We're going home. We're not doing the other dates. We're going home right now. We have to go home." I said, "All right, we're going." So Bob jumped under the wheel. It was the middle of the night. We drove, I think 5 or 6 hours straight back to Wagerville, and then the circus began. I was about to witness something that, to this day, still boggles my mind, that people can be this evil. As soon as we got back home and started to, gather intel on what had happened and what was going to happen, we discovered that Margie Sullivan was going to basically turn Emmett's passing and funeral into a 3-ring circus. And I'm going to tell you just how bad a taste this was. She hired a film company to come in and film Emmett's funeral and interview people at the funeral. And she intended to put this out and sell it. She was going to monetize Emmett Sullivan's death, like in the most distasteful way that you could ever imagine. And I'm talking about, they filmed this poor man in his fucking casket, right? Like it's horrendous. It's just horrendous how ugly and evil and horrible that this woman was. Like, it's just like, are you kidding me? You're going to film one of the greatest losses in this community and in the music community around here, and you're going to sell it? And there was even talk of charging admission to the funeral. It was just unbelievable. Unbelievable. But the first thing that happened was, of course, the following, when we got home in the morning, when it was late enough, because we got home at around 4 o'clock in the morning. As soon as the sun was up and people were moving around, me and Jerry and Bob and Tammy and Stephanie and everybody, we loaded up and went right to Emmett's house to be with Louise, his widow, his wife, When we got there, of course, the house was just packed, and Enoch and Margie were there. And I walked in first, and as soon as Jerry and Enoch saw each other, Enoch got up and just collapsed in Jerry's arms, crying, sobbing, just racked with grief. And they were just both, Jerry had sat down in a chair, and Enoch Sullivan was on his knees on the floor with his head on Jerry's chest, with the tears rolling down his nose. And Jerry, and they're just, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, you'd think that these two men, after everything that they've done to each other, but the truth came out in that moment. And Margie was standing over in the corner with her mouth all screwed up and looking just, if looks could have killed, I think both of those men would have been dead. And the truth was told at that moment, that it was not Enoch at all, it was her that had caused all the problems in that family. And it was just unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And they stayed that way, They stayed right. Enoch and Jerry were just glued to each other the whole time that they were in the house. They were just sat with each other. And when the tears subsided, they started to tell stories about Emmett and laughing. And it was surreal. It was surreal to finally see, the curtain torn down and the facade torn down and the lies put away. And these two men who had known each other all their lives and worked together for years and with Emmett were finally able to just meet each other as they had before all of the strife, before the car accident, before the lawsuits, and they just came together like nothing had ever happened. But that was not to last. It was over the minute they walked out of that house. And then the funeral. The funeral was heartbreaking. The funeral was just unbelievably bad. And it was indeed a circus. There was cameras everywhere. You had Margie there, selling selling records at this guy's funeral. And just the poorest taste ever displayed by any human being that I've ever seen in person. And I remember walking up to the casket, and Emmett was laying in there, and his hands were folded over his belly, and they were so beautiful. He had such beautiful hands. And I reached into the casket. It was the only time I've ever touched a dead person in my life. I reached in the casket and I put my hand on his hands. And I told him goodbye. And other people were walking by, and putting their picks and stuff in the casket with him. And it was just horrendous. It was the loss of a great man, magnified by that asshole. Yeah, it was the worst thing I've ever seen. In of that, of that type and that context, it was the worst thing I've ever seen. It was just embarrassing, and yeah, we walked out. I didn't even go to the graveside. I didn't bother. It was like, that's, I've had enough. I've had enough of this. And sure enough, she actually released that. She released his funeral on video and sold it. Good Lord. So there was a big piece of the puzzle gone, you know? And it seemed like at the time, my life has followed a really interesting pattern, and it's weird. It's really weird. I don't know if the pattern just sort of exists inside me because of the way that I react to things due to my upbringing and all of these things, or if there is just this external pattern overlaid over my life. It's hard to say, right? And it also calls into question, you know, a lot of things. There's some philosophical questions there, like do you actually have control in your life, or is there some predestined thing, right? And so that brings even more things into question. So one of the reasons I wrestled, with God all my life, because I could look back at the past and even look at the stuff in my present and clearly see the pattern, especially later on. But the pattern has been, for the most part, incredible loss, followed by the highest high that you could imagine, just over the moon, and then a long period of, quiet, then another massive explosion. And when I'm talking about loss, I'm talking about destruction on titanic levels. Like just things falling apart in so many different ways that there's not enough fingers to plug the holes in the dike. There's just, everything starts to go to shit in monumental ways. And you're just like, oh, what the? So I don't know. I just don't know what that is, or what it means, or how I should take it, really. But Emmett's death was the beginning of, and not right away, but it was the beginning of a total collapse of everything. Everything around us started to fall to pieces. So, but there was something coming, something humongous. So, the first thing that began to happen was Tammy's husband, who called him Tank. He was a really nice guy. He was a badass. He was. I don't think you'd want to mess with the fella, but we didn't really know the half of it. Apparently, suddenly, her Tammy and he started to have problems. I don't know what they were. We weren't, like, they were being kind of close-lipped about it, and then all of a sudden, she came out and said that he had touched one of the children inappropriately. So that was it for him. He was out on his ass, and she was going for getting a divorce, and we didn't know what was going on. he got put on the outside, and we lost track of him. At some point in time, well, he was floating around the outskirts of the family unit, trying to see what was going on, who supported him, who believed this and who didn't, and blah, blah, blah. And we didn't know. We just didn't know what was really going on. And I remember one night, Tank showed up at our house. Me and Bob were there alone, and showed up at the house, and we didn't know. He just showed up in the middle of the night. It was like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And he came in the house, and he was like, these people are trying to destroy me, and I never touched that little girl, and blah, blah, blah. And we were just like, we didn't know. We were afraid of him, to be honest, because he was under a lot of pressure. And of course, everybody around there had guns. So we didn't know what to do or say. So we just sort of were like, yeah, Tank, well, we don't know. We're not making any judgment, and we wish you the best, like whatever. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I mean, just hang in there. And so we got him out of the house. So on a side note, years after this, few years after this went down, he remarried, and he ended up shooting that woman. He had remarried this woman, and he ended up shooting her, killing her, shot her 9 times in the head, and ended up in prison for the rest of his life. So it's a good thing that we didn't say anything. I imagine he was probably packing heat the night he came to see us. God knows what would have happened if we'd have turned him away, or said anything untoward. We could have all ended up dead. So everything was starting to unravel, like in large ways. It was that in itself, the problems between Tammy and Tank and all of that was not good. And things between me and Stephanie were not good, because she was angry at this point, I think, now, and I just didn't care. I was just ignoring her, wouldn't even speak to her half the time. And so there was a ton of friction and negative energy in the group all the time, and we were out touring like this, and everything just seemed to be unraveling. It was just like, how much longer can we go like this, with all this loss, all this turmoil, legal problems, you name it. And what we didn't know was, we knew, like everybody knew, but it was not something we were counting on. But Marty Stewart was continually advocating for us in Nashville all the time. And Marty Stewart knew everybody, because he was Johnny Cash's son-in-law, so he knew everybody that existed. He was really close friends with Merle Haggard, George Jones, all the legends of country music. This man knew every one of them intimately, spent time with them, took pictures of them, played music with them, produced records on them. The guy was connected to everybody. Smart man to network that well his entire life. One day we got a monumental call in the midst of all this ugliness. And the call floored us. We were unsure of that it wasn't some kind of a prank. Marty called Jerry, and I was there the day the phone rang, and Jerry answered the phone. And he was, hey, Marty. And I was like, okay, now what's going on? Something's going to happen. And Jerry just sat on the phone there for quite some time without saying anything. And his face kind of weird. And after a couple of minutes, he went, okay, Marty, no worries, we'll be there. And he hung up the phone, and he just sat there looking at me with a strange look on his face. And I said, what's going on? So here's what is going on. The album called A Joyful Noise, which had done so well for Jerry that Marty produced for them right before I came on board, had gotten into the hands of many people in Nashville, a lot of people, because it was part of Emmylou Harris's Country Music Heritage Foundation. So she, like, obviously these records were being passed around through the elite of Nashville. And somehow it had gotten into the hands of none other than Waylon Jennings. Now, Waylon Jennings was the most unreligious, atheist person possibly that ever walked the face of the earth. But something about that record, and then apparently he had seen us on television or somewhere, he called Marty and said, I'm having a party at my house for my 54th birthday. And he said, I really want to know more about Jerry Sullivan. I'd like to meet that man and talk to him about things, And while he's there, you might as well tell him bring his crew with him so he can play. I'd like him to be the entertainment at my party. Marty nearly shit because Waylon had no use for gospel music, ever, that we know of. I've never really heard him play any or talk about it or anything. The man was the ultimate outlaw, drug addict, cleaned up, just the biggest badass that ever walked, right? And so Marty said, yeah, I'll get him. And so that's what Jerry's sitting there telling me. He's like, well, it looks like, next week we're going to drive up to Nashville and play at Waylon Jennings' 54th birthday party at his house in Nashville. And I was just sort of sitting there going, what? Really? And he's like, yeah, Waylon called Marty and said he wanted us to come up. And so there we were, heading for something that I could never have imagined ever happening. And it was about to open a bunch of chapters in this story that, well, places and people and things that I never ever thought I would ever encounter. I was about to get thrust into all of it. And it's amazing how far, a guitar and a thumb pick took me, or could take anybody. Unbelievable. I never thought in a million years when I was learning to do what I was doing that I would ever end up doing anything, but it ended up doing everything.